Good afternoon and welcome to Across the Arts with Patrick D. McCoy, the African American voice in classical music. And we certainly want to thank you for tuning into this very special edition of today's show. Today, we welcome composer Trevor Weston, professor of music at Drew University. Trevor is going to drop in to talk about his career as a composer and his appearance at the Color of Music Festival, which will happen later this month, October 22nd through the 26th in Charleston, South Carolina. Good afternoon, Trevor. Hello? Trevor, are you there? Trevor, are you there?
Hello?
Trevor, we've had some kind of snafu. I think you're on the air now. Good afternoon and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Listeners, I do apologize for that, but hopefully we can edit that great pause out. So, Trevor, just tell me about your work as a composer. Just tell me about who are some of the composers that influenced your interest in pursuing a career in composition?
Well, my first composition teacher was T.J. Anderson. I went to Tufts University, and he was my advisor, and I studied composition with him. And it was really through those lessons and his mentorship that I decided to become a composer. And he encouraged me to apply to graduate school. I left Tufts University and went to UC Berkeley and studied with Olly Wilson, amongst other composers, and he also became an important mentor to me as a composer, as an individual, and also as a scholar, someone who is interested in composition. And Olly Wilson is also known for his scholarship in African American music history. And at Berkeley, I also studied with Imbrie and Richard Felciano, also very important composers who influenced my work and my development.
Now, of course, I just asked about the influences that led to you speaking about your college influence. Talk to me about your family. What kind of musical background was readily available in your family upbringing?
Well, my father was an interior designer, but has been a singer in churches ever since he was a choir boy. In fact, while actually doing some research in Charleston, I found out that he took voice lessons with William Lawrence, who is an African-American musician who accompanied Roland Hayes and Marian Anderson. So growing up, I remember listening to him prepare solos and music for church. And there was a funny anecdote where he was learning a piece by listening to, I think it might have been The Seven Last Words of Christ by Dubois. Mm-hmm. And I said, Dad, you don't know this yet? And at age 5, I sang the whole thing from heart, just because I had a very good ear. So he said, you know what? We're going to put this child in a choir. So I started singing at Grace Episcopal Church in Plainfield, New Jersey. And while singing there, connected to families who had sent their boys to St. Thomas Choir School in New York City. And so I continued my education as a choir boy at St. Thomas Church. My mother is not a musician, but she grew up in the church. She was a Sunday school teacher. She's from Barbados. So I grew up with two people, both parents, well aware of church music, and both of them had a fondness for classical music, which was incredibly influential and supportive, as a matter of fact, in my development as a composer.
Talk to me a little bit more about St. Thomas Church, and perhaps could you talk a little bit more about Jerry Hancock's influence on your life as a musician?
So, as a choir boy at St. Thomas, Jerry Hancock was the director, and as a musician, he had a huge influence. for those of you who know Jerry Hancock's legacy, he was an amazing organist and an amazing improviser, and also had a great vision in music. I would say that as a boy, and I wasn't alone, his musicianship and his performance and the way that he conducted the choir had a huge influence on how I participated in music, if that makes sense. You know, my own kind of musicianship and my approach to music was very much influenced by that experience. Later in life, when I became a professional composer after graduate school, he actually commissioned me to write a piece for St. Thomas, a Magnificat and Nunc Dimittis. And really, it's a highlight of my career as a composer. Being able to write a piece for Jerry Hancock and for St. Thomas was first a daunting task. But in writing the piece, I realized how much that experience has influenced my work as a composer and also my sensibilities as a composer. Singing choral music at an early age has, in a sense, always connected my kind of outlook as a composer to text and how text is represented through music. Or when I want to just write a piece for myself, I tend to write a choral piece because it's so dear to my heart. And that connection really goes back to my experience at St. Thomas and working and performing under Jerry Hancock.
Now, I do have a clip of yours. It's entitled "In Thee, O Lord." Before I play it, could you maybe talk about a little bit about the background of this particular sacred work?
So when I was in graduate school at UC Berkeley, I directed a small chapel church called Christ the King. And it was an Anglo kind of Catholic Episcopalian chapel. And as music director, I decided that I would write music for my little quartet. I had a little quartet of basic, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And In Thee, O Lord is a piece that I wrote for one of our services. We had a very traditional liturgy, including singing the Alleluia. And I wrote In Thee, O Lord as a psalm verse to go with the Alleluia that we performed on Sundays. The recording that you have is of Cathedral of, I think Christ the King in Indianapolis. And I taught at Wabash College for a couple years. And while working at Wabash College, I went to many services at the cathedral in Indianapolis. And this recording is from one of their evensong performances.
Okay, let's take a listen to that now. In Thee, O Lord by Trevor Weston. Very nice. Now, if someone wanted to acquire your choral works, who, in particular, who is this particular anthem published by?
So all of my music currently is self-published. So if exactly, I'm working on that. But if someone would like a copy, they can contact me via Trevor Weston, or I think the best email address would be treston9@hotmail.com. I have a website, trevorweston.com, and my contact information is there. So if someone would like a copy, they can definitely contact me, and I can also inform them of other liturgical works. Again, singing in many choirs and having a church job for many years, I did write a few short anthems and maybe even longer anthems that are appropriate for church services.
So please visit trevorweston.com and definitely investigate securing those pieces. That's a nice piece. I hope I can do that one myself. That's really nice. Now let's go back to let's go back briefly. We're talking about Charleston. You're going to have a homecoming, so to speak, returning to Charleston to the Color of Music Festival, which is happening at the end of the month. Talk to me a little bit about the role of Charleston in your career as a professional musician.
Well, I taught the College of Charleston for 9 years, between 2000 and 2009. Professor of theory, composition, college, and it was a great period for many reasons. One, it's the first time I ever lived in the South, and two, Charleston has great musical life through the Spoleto Festival, but also through kind of the local musicians who play with the symphony or other chamber ensembles. And the choir at the College of Charleston, directed by Robert Taylor, performed many of my work. So as a composer, I was able to write a lot of music and get a lot of performances, which was fantastic. At the same time, I wrote a short research paper on Black musicians in Charleston, the early 20th century. And it's through that research I learned a lot about development of Black music, especially Black composers and their contributions to American art music. And more specifically, as I mentioned earlier, I found out that William Lawrence, who accompanied Marian Anderson and Roland Hayes, was from Charleston and taught voice lessons to my father, and my father knew him as a child. So really that experience was fantastic for those reasons alone. On top of that, I finally listened and attended performances of Gullah music. And I've written a couple pieces that are directly connected to Gullah music or Gullah culture. For those who may not be aware of this, Porgy and Bess, composed by Gershwin, is based on a Gullah story or takes place in Charleston, and Gershwin himself actually lived in Charleston for a few months listening to and participating in Gullah music performances. So I have a couple pieces, The People Could Fly and Messages, which are pieces that are directly connected to characteristics of Gullah music. So really that experience in Charleston has had a strong influence on my music and my development as a composer.
Now, at the Color of Music Festival, you will actually be doing I don't want to give too much of it away, but you will be presenting during the Symposium Series a presentation called Charleston's Contributions to Classical Music Around the World. And I believe that's the first symposium of the series, and I'm pretty excited about that. Now, speaking of the Color of Music Festival, how did you become associated with the music director and perhaps the founder, Lee Pringle?
So I met Lee Pringle probably in 2000, maybe 2001. Lee used to sing with the Charleston Symphony Chorus, and I used to sing with the Charleston Symphony Chorus. So we met then, and Lee, I think in 2000, came up with the wonderful idea of a gospel chorus connected to the Charleston Symphony. So I was brought on board to do some arrangements. We also organized a Valentine's Day event connected to the Charleston Symphony. So we met at that point. Outside of those two events, meaning the gospel, well, it became a gospel Christmas concert with the symphony and also a Valentine's Day concert with the symphony, Lee had this idea of coming up with a concert or concert series devoted to Black composers and Black musicians. And that's the first time that Lee came up with this idea. And I thought, wow, this is great. And we talked about it. And I guess about 10 years later, we have the Color of Music Festival. So I'm completely thrilled that such a great idea, which had its, initial kind of thoughts and discussions 10 years ago, has, flourished and come into not one set of concerts, but now an annual event in Charleston. So that's my connection to Lee Pringle.
Well, I'm certainly excited about the festival, and I had an opportunity. It was so amazing after hearing so much about you through Julian Wachner and the Washington Chorus that I finally got to meet you in person just this summer at the Made in America concert at the Kennedy Center. And one of the pieces of yours I wish I had a recording of to talk about, and maybe other people can go and research it. Could you maybe talk to the listeners about your piece, Ashes?
Sure. So Ashes was composed in 2002 as a response to the attacks of 9/11. And its premiere was in Charleston through a now defunct group called the Carolina Chamber Chorale. And they organized a concert in memory of 9/11 in 2002. I think it was in basically during the Piccolo Spoleto Festival, which is late May, early June. I grew up in New Jersey, went to New York often, and my sister used to work across the street from the tower. She worked at One Liberty Plaza. So, like many people, I had a direct connection to people who experienced 9/11. And growing up in this area, the towers, and knowing how many people from New Jersey commuted to that area of the world, it was just kind of horrific. So I felt like I needed to write something, and not just about the destruction, but about suffering, because seeing the images of people who had lost their loved ones and carrying, pictures, kind of knowing what the outcome was, but hoping, that to me really went to the core of, being human, having this connection and feeling lonely because others aren't really aware that this isn't just another human who died. This is my so-and-so who means this to me. So I wanted to write a piece that addresses that. So Ashes uses text from Psalm 102 from the Bible, and the title comes from one of the verses from that psalm, which is, "I've eaten my ashes as it were bread." And that came to me because I remember hearing that there were recorded cell phone calls from people who were in the rubble, stuck, calling their loved ones the last time. And that idea of people maybe actually eating ashes while they're kind of making their last connection to those who they love and love them, I think really struck me. So I wanted to write a piece, that was inspired by, you can say inspired, or in response to 9/11, but really addressing this issue of human suffering and kind of sadness and melancholy. So that was the piece that was performed at the Kennedy Center. There were maybe over 200 singers. It was really the best performance I've heard. It was fantastic, and I was very happy with the performance and hearing it again, and really very happy with how that piece affects people. someone came to me after the concert and said that they lost their brother recently, and this piece was helping them to cope. And in a way, that's one of the best compliments I've ever received. I hope that, my music can help someone.
So that was
there is
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say there is a YouTube recording of that piece by the chamber singers or the chamber chorus from University of California, Berkeley. So there are people who are interested in hearing it. It does exist online.
So in fact, that performance at the Kennedy Center, that was the Washington debut of Ashes.
That was the Washington debut, and Julian Walkner heard the actual premiere in Charleston. He was an assistant conductor with the Spoleto Festival and went to the concert. Julian and I both attended St. Thomas Choir School together, and we reconnected in Charleston. He was participating in the Spoleto Festival, and we reconnected. He heard Ashes, liked the piece, and decided later that same year in 2002 that he would bring it to Providence, Rhode Island, and have the Providence Singers perform it. And he used to be the conductor for the Providence Singers. So in many ways, the piece Ashes is also connected to, my relationship with Julian Walkner.
It's amazing how the universe works to bring all these things back into being after different periods of time. Now, just as we close, first of all, I want to say, Trevor, thank you so much for taking time out to chat with me about your career and your role in the Color Music Festival. I really am thankful and honored about this opportunity. And just as we close, I want to just bring up a new point just in closure. Of course, you're teaching at Drew University and you're teaching composition. Could you maybe talk to me about, the future of composition, perhaps the kinds of students that may be passing your doors, and in particular, maybe African-American composers. What's the future of African-American composers in the classical music genre or world?
Wow. Well, let me put it this way. African Americans have always participated in writing classical music. It's a long tradition that I guess few are aware of. There were composers of African descent living in Europe who composed music that we consider to be classical music. Mm-hmm. So it's something that has always existed and will continue. I feel like I'm now a middle-aged composer. That sounds strange to say, but I am meeting and seeing younger African-American composers. And I think something that's true for the African-American community, and I think all communities, is I think that more and more younger composers are coming from a different vantage point when it comes to classical music. It's something that is shared by everyone. I think more people feel connected to classical music, and it's not something that is exclusive anymore. I live in Brooklyn, and there are a lot of young, really talented, fascinating composers who write classical music, and they have they have a toe in what we might consider pop or indie music. So I think when we look to the future, which I think is very bright for African-American composers in particular, I think that the current kind of inclusive outlook of classical music is pointing to a bright and continued kind of growth in first contemporary music, but also growth in the number of composers of African descent who will participate in the development of art music in America.
Again, thank you so much, Trevor, for being on the broadcast today. It's been a wonderful conversation with you. And again, Trevor Weston will be a part of the Color of Music Festival, October 22nd through the 26th, especially on the Symposium Series, which he will present Charleston's contribution to classical music around the world. Again, this has been Across the Arts with Patrick D. McCoy. the African American Voice in Classical Music. And we do hope that you go to www.colorofmusic.org and visit and check out the offerings of the Color of Music Festival. And again, Trevor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon. This is Patrick D. McCoy, the African American Voice in Classical Music, and we are honored today to speak to bass Soloman Howard. Good afternoon, Soloman.
Good afternoon, Patrick. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's good to talk to you. Now, we've been following you over the years, and it was just a couple of years ago it seemed that you made your Kennedy Center debut with the Conservatory Project, and now, I mean, you are just singing up a storm all over the place. Just talk to us a little bit about your experience so far with Washington National Opera.
Wow, man. So, just coming into the opera was an experience for me. I auditioned for the chorus, and Scott Guzlick, who was the director of artistic planning at the time, he heard me. And so, took me straight to the top people to audition for it, to sing for Christina Shuffleman and then Maestro Placido Domingo. So, it was just a great experience, something that was pretty much unreal because I had no idea that I was going to be, pretty much accepted on the spot. But Washington Opera has been really, really great to me. I've worked with Louis Salimno, Ken